What's up everybody, Matt Maran here for a different type of video today. So I wanted to go through all of my old cars and kind of give an update on where they all are. I did a video similar to this almost 6 years ago, and it was a lot of fun to kind of go back and look at the Carfaxes and see, where they're at, what has happened to them and stuff. And I'm very sentimental about my old cars. I miss most of them, even if they weren't perfect. And so it's just kind of interesting for me personally to go and see, what's happened to them. But I know many of you enjoyed some of the cars that I've owned on this channel in the past, so I wanted to give you guys an update as well. So I thought maybe some of you would be a little bit curious about what happened to them. And the Carfax has turned up some pretty interesting stuff here. There's some that I was expecting more, that there was actually less, but then there are some that had a few interesting twists and turns I was not expecting. So it was all very, very fascinating. And I'm also going to get to Beth's two cars that she had during the time that I've known her here as well, before her current Mercedes. And so I'll cover those at the end of the video too. But yeah, so I first want to thank Carfax for supplying me with the Carfaxes for this video. This video is not sponsored by them or endorsed by them or anything like that, but they did provide me with the Carfaxes, so I want to thank them for that. It's very fascinating. If you're ever bored, you want to check out your Carfax on your old cars. It's really cool. All you need is the VIN, and I save all my VINs on all my cars, and so as long as you have that, you can find out, where it's at, what's going on with it. But anyway, my first car, I'm not going to get too in-depth on this. I did do, in my video 6 years ago, I kind of gave more background on my first few cars and stuff. So I'll link that if you want to hear more details on my first couple of cars. But my first car was a 1997 Subaru Impreza Outback Sport that was handed down to me by my parents. They bought it brand new in 1997, and it was a really cool little car. And so there's no update on that car since the last video, actually, unfortunately. So back then, I reported it got to 181, almost 182,000 miles back in 2013, actually, when an oil change was reported. And then the last update was in March of 2014, where it was issued a salvage and junk title somewhere in Pittsburgh, and nothing has changed since. So that makes me kind of sad, because I'm assuming it met an unhappy demise and it's now either crushed and long gone or sitting in a junkyard somewhere. I wish I had more information. Unfortunately, Carfax doesn't say anything about where the title was issued or anything, aside from being in the Pittsburgh area. But I would love to go hunting for that car someday and see if I could find it. If it is still sitting in a pull-apart yard or something like that, that'd be really cool to kind of be reunited with it. And maybe it was issued those titles and has continued to be driven, and just hasn't been updated with any kind of service records or anything, but the registration has not been updated since then, so I'm assuming it's off the road. So that's kind of a bummer, because that car was a really good little car, and it was actually through 2 accidents with my parents, just bad luck kind of stuff. And so it held on though, and it was reliable. It was a good first car for me. And yeah, so everyone's first car they remember, and they're kind of a little bit nostalgic about, I think. So unfortunately, no new updates there on that one. Now, I do have some updates on my Legacy GT spec.B. So I had a 2006 Legacy GT spec.B that I bought. I was the second owner. I bought it with about 15,000 miles on it back in 2007. I bought it for about the same price as a used 2006 WRX, which was like a phenomenal bargain, considering the spec.Bs were kind of expensive, at the time. Back then, spending brand new, they were like $35,000, which was a lot of money for a Legacy GT, especially back then. These days, even the Legacy XTs, are maybe about 40 fully loaded, but I mean, that was a lot of money back then, and I was able to get it for 20 grand, which was like a phenomenal bargain for a 1-year-old spec.B. Anyway, I had it for, I think, about 5 years or so. I took it up to about 88,000 miles on it. I did a bunch of videos on that car, because that was back when I was doing my YouTube channel and had a lot of, content with that car. So I'll link that playlist if you're curious about that. But so the last update, whenever I did my last video, was it belonged to the person that I sold it to. So he had owned it, and he was in Connecticut at the time. He owned it for 3 years, and he moved from Connecticut to Florida and put about 28,000 miles on it over the course of his 3 years of ownership there. He added a bigger turbo on it and kept it in really good shape. And then in the summer of 2016, the newer update here is that he sold it to a woman in Florida that's been enjoying it ever since. And so she actually gave me an update on it today. She was kind enough to kind of give me an update. And so she said that the motor has been built now, so it's got a new motor in it. She actually put a 6-speed transmission in it because the 06 spec.Bs actually had a 5-speed manual. It wasn't until the 07 spec.Bs where they put the STI 6-speed in those. So she put the 6-speed in, so that's a cool upgrade. She also swapped the wheels, added Brembo brakes, added a Nardi steering wheel even, and so it looks way cooler than it ever did whenever I had it, and it's really a sweet looking car still, and so I'm glad she's continuing to enjoy it. She did say the radiator blew last month, the axle boot is torn, has a couple other little issues, but she still isn't enjoying it. It has 138,000 miles on the body now, and I think about 20 or so on the engine and stuff, but it's continuing to do well. She says she doesn't drive it very much now. She only puts maybe about 4,000 or so miles on it a year, but she's still, it's not her daily driver, but she still really enjoys it. She's drag raced it, autocrossed it, all that kind of stuff, and has a lot of fun with it still. So I'm very grateful that I'm able to keep tabs on that car, because that's the only vehicle out of my past vehicles I'm actually able to see updates on periodically, whenever she posts something. And I'll link her Instagram above there. You can check it out if you're curious to see more pictures of that car. But that is another one that I do really miss. So the next car, though, one that many of you probably found this channel through, is the BRZ, the 2013 Subaru BRZ that I bought brand new. Was one of the first BRZs in my area, and it was a very exciting car. It really helped to springboard the channel, and was just a really great car overall. I love that thing. I still miss it a lot, and seeing the new BRZ that just came out here and was revealed, it really pulls on my heartstrings to get another one, because this one, really, I loved it a lot, and it was a car I didn't want to sell. I had to sell it just because of my financial situation at the time, but it's one that I'm glad it has continued to have a good life, aside from one little interesting twist, which I'll get to here in a second. So, going through the Carfax here, so I was the first owner, traded in with 34,000 miles on it in 2014. The second owner kept it for a little over a year and put about just 8,000 miles on it over the course of that year, and I was actually able to go visit the car whenever it was traded in that second time. The salesman of the dealership where they took in the trade notified me, and so I was able to go visit it, and I did a video kind of reuniting with the BRZ again, and that was the last time I've seen it, but I will link that video if you're curious to see how it looked back then. So it eventually sold from there, and so the third owner bought it at the end of 2015, and they drove it a good amount, racking up another 60,000 miles in a little over 2 years. So they put a good amount of miles on it, and they put it over 100,000. They got to 102,000 miles when they sold it. So it was doing really well, and then owner number 4 bought it in early 2018. They added another 20,000 miles in a year, but about 6 months later, in September of 2019, it was actually reported as stolen, but then it was recovered the very next day. So I'm not sure if it was a very quick turnaround or what happened there. The Carfax doesn't list any kind of damage or any other issues. It just says reported as stolen, reported as found, and then the owner continued to keep it. They actually updated the registration on it the very next week and continued to drive it for about another year or so. So I guess it was an uneventful theft. I don't know if it was something that within someone that they knew, or whatever happened to it, but thankfully it sounds like it wasn't actually damaged in the theft, so that's good. But I was like, what? It was stolen? Like, that's kind of crazy. So that was kind of wild. And then they traded in September of 2020 here, actually, not too long ago, with 140,000 miles on it. And according to the Carfax, there weren't any kind of service records since actually the last service record was at 67,000 miles. So I guess whatever, if they're doing oil changes themselves or something, didn't report it. So I don't know how it did, but I would assume if it was, at the dealer for a bunch of maintenances or had a bunch of things replaced, that would show up on the Carfax. So I'm assuming it's been reliable and uneventful for over 140,000 miles now. So anyone that's curious about how high mileage BRZs are, I don't know how all of them are, but at least mine, is up to 140,000 miles without any issues here. And so that's pretty cool. And it was in Pennsylvania the entire time, by the way, up until this point. But then the next owner here bought it this past fall and moved it to West Virginia back in November, actually. And there hasn't been any update on it since then. Yeah, I'm just glad the thief didn't ruin it whenever it was stolen. And it continues to do well. Hopefully it continues to do well. And I will have to keep an eye out for it if I'm ever in West Virginia. So that's interesting there. The next vehicle up was the 2008 Mini Cooper S that I had. And that one was one that I didn't even save the VIN number originally because I didn't care. I was like, this thing burned me so much. It was like a miserable 6 months. I really enjoyed the car, but it just was super unreliable. I mean, anyone who watched the channel back then, they know I bought it in May of 2014 with 46,000 miles on it. And in my turbulent 6 months of ownership, the thermostat broke, which caused it to overheat and leave me stranded. I had to like limp it home and, let it cool off for another 10 minutes and then drive for another 5, let it cool off again. It was a nightmare of a day. Then less than 2 months later, the water pump failed. And then, it was like the clutch was starting to slip, and that was kind of the nail in the coffin where I was like, this thing is awful. I had such plans for that thing. I really loved that thing, and I drove the wheels off it. In those 6 months, I ended up putting, I think, about 15,000 miles on it. I drove that thing a ton. I loved it. It was so much fun whenever it was working, but unfortunately, I just had the bad luck of getting one of the Minis that just doesn't work right. It's a very hit or miss thing with the R56 generation Minis. My friend had one. His was like a 2010, so it might have been a little bit newer, and that might have helped, but he had absolutely zero issues with his. I know lots of other people that have no issues with their R56s. Mine was a second model year, so it wasn't the very first model year, which usually would have more issues, but still just completely unreliable. And so I was really curious with the Carfax to see, well, did the next owners have a bunch of headaches as well or not? Unfortunately, since I traded it in Columbus, Ohio at the end of 2014, there have been no updates other than registration updates. And even the registration updates haven't given any new mileage updates. So I have no clue how many miles are on it. And as far as the Carfax goes, I guess the person's just doing everything off the books if they're, doing maintenance on it. But it has nothing. There's no update whatsoever. So not even an oil change is listed. So I have no clue how that car's doing. I was really bummed. I was hoping that one would give me a bunch of info, as far as whether I made the right decision or not. Maybe if I would have done the clutch, maybe it would have been fine for the next 300,000 miles. I don't know. And unfortunately, it seems like I will never know. So we'll have to see. Maybe something will turn up here in the next few years and I can do another Carfax. But in the meantime, the Mini seems to be still hanging out somewhere in Columbus, Ohio, and seems to, I guess, be doing well. But that one's kind of a mystery. So interesting to see that. Next are all my Mustangs here. So, I've owned 4 now, with the Bullet being the 4th. The first one, though, the 2015 Mustang EcoBoost that I bought brand new, with the help of many of you, by the way. That one is another one that was a very interesting twist to it. So, I was the first owner. I took it to Cobb Stage 3, did tons of videos about what it's like to own a new Mustang, what it's like to modify them, how the EcoBoost engine holds up, how it responds to mods, all those types of things that I, contribute all those videos. And I think many of you really enjoyed that. I did over 100 videos on that car in my roughly 2 years of owning it. So I took it to Cobb Stage 3. I started to get concerned about the reliability, and I was kind of getting a little paranoid, especially since so many EcoBoost motors were blowing left and right, especially modified ones. I got kind of worried about that motor and its reliability. I'm not someone who's a big fan of unreliable vehicles. Clearly, the Mini burned me, and so with the EcoBoost, I was not ready for another headache as far as reliability stuff goes. So, drove that car for about 29,000 miles, did over 100 videos on it, and then did trade it in, as many of you probably remember, on a 2016 Mustang GT. But as far as this EcoBoost goes, it sat on the dealer's lot for over 7 months when I traded it in before it finally sold. And then the second owner kept it in the Pittsburgh area, but only had it for 5 months before they traded in with 32,000 miles. So I don't know if they got freaked out as well. I do know that it would intermittently smoke at idle for no good reason. And even stock EcoBoosts were doing that. And it was like a weird evap thing, I think. I don't know. I'm still not in love with those early EcoBoosts. I think they can definitely be a basket case. But anyway, so they traded in just 5 months later. The Carfax doesn't list any services other than replacing one tire from, I'm guessing, a flat tire incident. So aside from that, I'm not sure why they dumped it so quickly. But anyway, they got rid of it, and then the third owner bought it in the fall of 2017 and appears to still own it, but its life got more interesting for sure. So first, in January of 2020, actually, it was in a minor accident that did damage to the front and the rear. So I don't know if it was rear-ended and then that bumped it into the front, into the back of somebody else or what, but they kept it after that accident. But then the last update here in July of 2020 is that it was actually exported to the Netherlands, and that's the last update. So I'm guessing guess, and it's just, you know, rocking it over in the Netherlands. Someone's having a blast over there with it, and so that's really cool to think that that car is now in an entirely different country across the Atlantic Ocean, and it's pretty wild stuff. So that was a fun little twist to find out about the EcoBoost, and hopefully it's continuing to do well over there. But then my next Mustang, the 2016 Mustang GT, that was the one that was cursed with bad luck, I'm convinced, just because for those who didn't follow the channel back then, it was 8 days after I bought it brand new. 8 days later, it was sideswiped by a motorcyclist that came into the oncoming lane and took out the entire driver's side. The side mirror came and smacked me in the face, and bumped into Beth's head as well as it was falling down, and the entire driver's side was just destroyed. The guy was going at least 50 on his bike, just took the turn way too hot, and I was there to catch him with the side of my car that was brand new, so that was not fun. You know, that happened, and then almost exactly a year later, as I was driving through a park, a enormous tree branch fell on my roof, came about that close to bashing in my head and taking me out completely, and thankfully it didn't, and thankfully the roof of the Mustangs are very strong, but that destroyed the entire roof, the entire, you know, like A pillar, B pillar, C pillar, all that was, you know, crushed, trunk was crushed, all that kind of stuff. And so that, you know, definitely is showing up on the Carfax here as severe damage. And, you know, that was almost exactly a year. It was like 10 days away from being exact to the day of when the last accident happened. And I'd only had 12,000 miles on it at that point. I was like, you know what? At that point, I had never had a car get wrecked on me in my entire life of owning cars until that one, and then I had two within a year. I was like, this thing is cursed. I just want to get rid of it. And thankfully, the body shop owner gave me a very generous offer, and so I couldn't turn it down. So I sold it to him as is while they were still fixing it and replacing the roof and all that kind of stuff. So I took that and bought a nearly identical Mustang GT, which I'll get to in a minute. But as far as this GT goes, after I had it, the body shop owner kept it for a few months and put a spoiler on it and put some window tint on it. And I actually was able to catch it whenever it was listed for sale, whenever he put it up for sale, and so that's how it looked, you know, just a few thousand miles after it had been fixed again. And so the third owner bought it in January of 2018 off of him, and has only put about 12,000 miles on it since then, but hasn't had any freak accidents, at least according to the Carfax, and it's still in the Pittsburgh area somewhere. So I mean, clearly it's more of a garage queen, isn't driven too much, you know, if it's, you know, only had about 12,000 miles since 2018, but you know, I'm glad that it at least hasn't had any more bad luck. Maybe it was just me that was the bad luck. I don't get it. But anyway, I'm glad that that car has continued to live in peace since then. So that's good. And then the last Mustang here, the one that I ended up trading in on the Bullet, the 2016 Mustang GT with the black appearance package. So all the badges were blacked out, the different wheels and stuff. It looked really cool. I liked that car a lot. And so that was just kind of a car that I knew the Bullet was coming. I was very confident, even though I didn't have any inside or info. I was just so confident. I was like, they're gonna do a Bullet. So this car was just to tide me over for about a year until the next Bullet, you know, was here. And so I bought it with about 16,000 miles on it and got it up to about 24,000 before I traded it in. In that time, though, many of you might have remembered the evap system triggered a check engine light. It was easily fixed, and the air conditioning did die on me, which is common for those S550 Mustangs. And so that needed to be fixed and recharged, and so it did that. But otherwise, it never let me down here in that, you know, 1 year that I owned it. And so I traded into Lebanon Ford outside of Cincinnati, Ohio. But the person that actually ended up buying it from them took it to St. Louis, and they seem to be an interesting owner. So they added an exhaust, which is cool. They also added a new radiator, and then they added some type of navigation system. But then the strange thing is that they plasti dipped all the badges red, and I wish I have pictures of it because I saw it when it was listed for sale at the dealership whenever they traded it in. But it had like red, plasti dipped red badges on a dark green car. I mean, everything was red. It was really strange. I think they painted a bunch of the interior and stuff as well. A little bit interesting taste with that owner. But anyway, they traded it in 1 year later, by the way. They did all that stuff to the car, and then they dumped it 8,000 miles later. There weren't any mechanical issues, according to the Carfax. They just did all these mods and then traded it in 8,000 miles 1 year later in the summer of 2019. After that, it sat for about 3 months. It was sent to an auto auction in the fall, and that brought it to a dealership in Arkansas, actually, where it was sold at the end of 2019, and it's now up to 41,000 miles and seems to be doing well in Arkansas still. So that's where that one's at. So kind of cool to see they're all scattered all over the world, and so that's cool. And so that's all my cars. Of course, now I have the Bullitt Mustang. That's up to just over 15,000 miles currently here in the winter of 2021. And yeah, thankfully that car has still been treating me really well. I have done updates on that, of course, as well, if you've missed those, if you were curious to see how the Bullitt's doing. But now for Beth's cars, very briefly, I'm just going to touch on the two that she had during the time that I've known her. So the first one that she had was the 2014 Ford Fiesta. She was leasing that vehicle, and she doesn't drive very much, especially back then, or very far. So over her 3-year lease, she put less than 10,000 miles on that vehicle. And during that time, the clutch was kind of weird as well. I think we had the clutch serviced once, although the Carfax does not list that. I believe we actually had the clutch replaced because it was slipping and stuff, or they fixed something, but the dealer never actually put in that the clutch was replaced because it wasn't showing up on the Carfax there, but I believe it actually was. Anyway, after we turned it in, it went to an auto auction that took it to a suburb outside of Philadelphia, actually, where the current owner has put another 60,000 miles on it and seems to not be having any issues, unless the Carfax isn't reporting those either. I'm not sure, if the dealers are just keeping those dual clutch things on the down low or what, but anyone who knows or has seen the stories about those Fiestas and Focuses with that dual clutch automatic, they're very problematic. My sister-in-law actually also had a Fiesta. Hers had a bunch of issues with the dual clutch auto and those. And there's been several recalls and extended warranties that Ford has volunteered on those transmissions because they've just been such a nightmare for so many people. And so it's a good thing that Beth leased her so she didn't have to deal with that, for a long period of time or anything. But it seems like it's doing okay. At least it got to, almost 70,000 miles here. So it seems to be doing, decently well at least. So that's good. And then the last vehicle here was her 2016 Mercedes C300, which was her first Mercedes that she leased. It's the one that we reviewed together several years ago. You can go watch that video if you haven't seen it yet. And so Beth's lease on that ended back in May of 2019. And she had 27,000 miles on it at that point. We actually had it as an off-lease or an off-loaner. It was like a former service loaner vehicle that we were still able to lease. So that's how we were able to get a really good deal on that one. Because it was technically kind of like a used vehicle you could lease, which was kind of cool. And so it had like 7,000 on it. She put about 20 on it, in her 3-year lease here. And during that time, though, we just had one flat tire, which was a minor inconvenience because it was a run flat tire on those Mercedes, which is a nice thing to have. And then there was one time where the electronic system, I think, freaked out and went into like a limp mode or something. But aside from that, it also would randomly have the forward collision warning would like go off for no apparent reason. That was the only issues we had with it. So it's only had one owner after her, and still is in the Pittsburgh area somewhere here. But it has over 41,000 miles now. But the Carfax does show that it went to the dealer once to have the electrical system checked. Then it went once more to have the transmission checked, and then again just a few months back to have the air conditioning checked. So I kind of allude to this in some of my live streams and other videos, but be wary of off-lease German vehicles because they're built for, being pretty good for a lease period, but after that, a lot of used German vehicles turn out to be basket cases. Not all of them, of course, it is still luck of the draw a lot of times. But this kind of illustrates that, this owner has been back to the dealer several times to check various things just in the past, year and a half here. So, that's why we only lease her Mercedes. And as far as German vehicles go, my personal rule is to only lease them, never buy one, at least used. If you can buy one new and flip it, every couple of years, that's fine too. But, it makes sense just to lease those. That's really what it seems like they build them for is, for the company leases. That's kind of, I think, a lot of their bread and butter for the German companies. So just a little bit of a side note of a little personal advice maybe on the leasing of the German stuff. But her current Mercedes, it also has had a couple little minor electrical freakouts here, but otherwise it's been pretty good, and it's a really nice car, of course. But so that's an update on all the vehicles here that we've owned here over the past my entire life and over the past few years for Beth here. So Hopefully you found this interesting. I don't know, maybe I'm just kind of geeky when it comes to Carfaxes and stuff, but I love, even whenever I'm like just looking on used car sites, I love pulling up the Carfaxes and being like, I wonder if this one had any issues, and going through those and seeing, what the history's been like on some of these cars. I just find it really fascinating. Hopefully you guys really enjoyed it as well. I am planning on doing another video on running Carfaxes on other vehicles as well. I'm going to post that here relatively soon, hopefully, so give me your feedback though on this one as far as how you liked it. Maybe I can start doing updates like this a little bit more frequently here, maybe every year or so, and see if there's any updates on anything. But yeah, thank you guys very much for watching. Let me know, if you follow your old cars, if you're sentimental about that. But anyway, thank you guys very much for watching. Let me know your thoughts and everything in the comments below. Now, I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.